Hey guys, tonight we're diving into what Victorian hygiene was really like. Forget everything Hollywood told you. This is the real story, and trust me, you probably wouldn't last a day. So before you get too comfortable, hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of deep dive, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from now. Dim the lights, maybe. Grab a snack, and let's jump in, because you are about to wake up in the year 1857 in the Lower East Side of London, and your first thought is that your face feels crustier than the inside of a chimney, and that is mostly because it kind of is. You roll over on your straw mattress, which is doing its best impression of a sack of gravel, and you immediately regret this decision, because your back makes a noise that should only come from a ship hull under pressure, and you blink a few times only to discover that your eyelids are temporarily glued together by a substance that is technically your own body's response to coal soot and general despair. Congratulations, you are alive in the Victorian era, and you smell like it. To the room around you is damp, cold, and filled with the gentle aroma of 10 humans, all forgetting what soap smells like. You consider getting up to wash your face, and then remember that the basin in the corner hasn't been emptied since last Tuesday, and the water now has the same color and viscosity as weak tea with a side of tuberculosis. So instead, you grab a scratchy cloth that may once have been a shirt and try to rub the misery off your cheeks. Spoiler: it doesn't work now. Before we dive in too far, let me ask you something. Do you enjoy breathing freely? Because Victorian hygiene has a lot to say about that, particularly in the form of shared bathwater lead pipes and a general misunderstanding of what germs are you stumble out of bed into the single hallway you share with 3 other families, and try not to gag as you pass the chamber pot, which is heroically attempting to hold back the tide of last night's digestive mistakes, and failing audibly, you head downstairs, where the kitchen is also the laundry room, the nursery, and the designated rat convention center, and someone is boiling cabbage, which means the air now smells like hot despair laced with sock steam and the unmistakable funk of 19th century foot care. You attempt to rinse your hands in the wash bowl, only to realize that someone else has already rinsed something in it, and that something may have had legs. Now that you've technically washed up, let's talk about teeth, or more accurately, the anxious Victorian avoidance of them, because dental hygiene in this era is basically a choose-your-own-adventure book, where every choice ends in gingivitis. You might brush your teeth with soot if you're lucky, or crushed eggshells if you're feeling festive. Or you might just swish a little brandy and call it morning mouthwash, which is at least more honest than what your toothbrush is doing, because your toothbrush, if you have one, is probably made of bone and shared with other members of your household, including possibly the dog, and is stored next to the razor blades and leftover beef dripping for convenience. This is all fine, because most Victorians expect their teeth to fall out eventually anyway, and many folks invest in beautiful wooden dentures, which are about as comfortable as stuffing a small bookshelf in your mouth, and twice as absorbent. You chew your stale bread quietly and reflect on the fact that Victorian breakfast was less about nutrition and more about not dying before noon. Speaking of breakfast, the porridge is lukewarm and lightly dusted with ash from the nearby fireplace, which is actually an upgrade from yesterday's surprise edition of mouse footprints. You eat fast, because in a few minutes it will be time for your weekly bath. Yes, weekly if you are rich, and biannual if you are not. and daily if you are a hallucination. Sent from the future now. Let's not be hasty about this bath because it involves several critical stages. The first is finding water, which must be hauled in buckets from the pump out back, which is more of a suggestion than a promise, because the pump occasionally spits out frogs, and once produced what may have been part of a fish. The second step is heating that water over the same fire you use for cooking laundry and emotional trauma. And the third step is pouring it into a tin washtub that has seen so much human skin it probably has opinions by now. You take your clothes off, slowly, partly because they stick to you, and partly because removing your only shirt feels like peeling off a second, more judgmental skin. You lower yourself into the water, which immediately turns the color of weak gravy, and you try not to think about how many people will use this same water before it is emptied into the gutter, where it will join all the other dreams circling the drain outside you. Scrub yourself with a rag that used to be a sock and some lye soap that is more exfoliant than cleanser and burns. Like the memory of lost dignity, you rinse off with a tin cup of water and then stand up carefully, avoiding the tetanus nail poking out of the floorboard, and you dry yourself with a towel that is approximately as absorbent as a brick, but twice as itchy. You are now clean by Victorian standards, which means you smell faintly of ash soap and leftover choices. Congratulations now that you've survived your bath. Let's talk about hair care, which in Victorian times was less about shine and volume and more about deterring lice and hiding the fact that you haven't washed it since the Corn Laws were repealed. You grab your hairbrush, which is less of a grooming tool and more of a medieval instrument of self-reflection. It has lost several bristles and gained a few residents, namely the lice, who now hold monthly meetings in your scalp and possibly vote. On municipal issues, you begin the ritual of brushing, which involves yanking, tugging, and silently apologizing to your ancestors for whatever choices led to this moment. Victorian hair care is mostly about applying enough pomade to stick your curls in place while repelling both water and intimacy. The good news is that the mixture of lard, wax, coal, dust, and occasionally brandy does create a protective shell around your head. The bad news is that it smells like something that died in a fireplace and looks worse, but you press forward, sculpting your hair into something that vaguely resembles a respectable style, or at least something that won't get you mistaken for a chimney sweep who lost a fight with a ceiling beam. Now that you've survived hair care, let's talk about clothes, specifically undergarments, or more accurately, the Victorian relationship. With linen and denial, you pull on your chemise, which is technically clean because it was boiled last week and hung out to dry. In a foggy alleyway next to a fishmonger, it smells like faint mold and stronger regret, but you tell yourself it's breathable because admitting otherwise would cause collapse. Over this, you wear several layers of wool and cotton and possibly sadness depending on your station and the season. Each layer adds a new level of discomfort and insulation from happiness. The corset is next, and let me be clear, it is not a fashion statement. It is a medieval torture device wrapped in satin and expectations. It squeezes your torso into a shape that screams elegance from a distance and internal organ damage up close, but you endure it because that's what Victorian hygiene is all about. Enduring things quietly while smelling faintly of boiled soap and floor polish. Men have it no easier because their wardrobes involve starched collars, cravats, waistcoats, and a number of buttons rivaling modern car dashboards, all of which must be maintained with the precision of a military parade. Despite the fact that you just bathed in the same water as your entire family and a possibly haunted bar of soap before we go any further, let me know in the comments whether you'd rather wear a Victorian corset for a week or bathe in reused wash water every Sunday. Personally, I'd choose the corset, but only because it doesn't include the smell of communal feet. You step outside onto a cobbled street that is mostly mud, partly horse manure, and entirely a betrayal to your boots, which, by the way, are made of stiff leather and designed to punish your ankles for sins you didn't commit. The smell hits you first, a pungent blend of open sewers, chimney soot, spoiled milk, and that one guy who hasn't washed his scarf since the last cholera outbreak. You walk past rows of houses, all lined with smoke, grime, and the occasional child who looks like he emerged from a Dickens novel and hasn't been fed since the Crimean War. A man selling eels shouts something incomprehensible at you while waving a bucket of what might be fish or might be ghosts. It's hard to tell because everything here is wet, including the air, the pavement, and your soul. You pass a washwoman emptying a tub of gray water into the gutter, which is also where children play, and pigs sometimes nap. You avoid eye contact because she has the 1,000-yard stare of someone who has boiled 30 pairs of socks and seen things the human mind was not built to witness. Speaking of socks, let's talk about laundry. Because if you think Victorian hygiene means clean clothes, I have some deeply disappointing news for you. Most people own 2 sets of clothes if they're lucky, and one of those sets is only worn to funerals, which is convenient because that's also where most of them end up. The washing process involves lye, water, a boiling cauldron, and enough elbow grease to power a small steamboat. Stains are judged not by how to remove them, but by whether they're the kind that tells a story or the kind that raises questions. And whites are rarely white, more of a wistful beige at best. Now that you've walked the street, dodged a suspicious puddle, and possibly a feral goose, let's visit a public lavatory. If you can call it that, which you can't, because most Victorians simply went wherever the mood struck. If you were lucky enough to find a privy, it would be a shared wooden shack with a hole that descended into a pit of nightmares, some of which dated back to the reign of George III. There was no toilet paper, only newspaper leaves, or, if you were desperate, a handful of dignity. And while you crouched there, you could reflect on your choices, your diet, and the suspicious creaking sound. That meant the floorboards were about to betray you. But don't worry, because chamber pots were always an option. And by option, I mean required most of the time and emptied by flinging them out the window with a hearty cry of Gardilou, which is Victorian for I hope your hat wasn't expensive. And speaking of being outside, let's discuss the public bathhouses, which were either glorious marbled palaces for the wealthy or overcrowded soup kettles for the rest, where you sat naked next to 12 strangers, all hoping the water would kill the lice faster than it killed the mood. You paid a penny to enter and prayed you didn't leave with anything that required ointment. Now you may be thinking, surely they had soap. And yes, they did, but Victorian soap was less about fragrance and more about scouring off the top layer of your soul. It was made with fat lye, sand, and dreams, crushed under the weight of industrial progress. It burned, it scratched, and it left you smelling like you just fought your way out of a tallow candle factory. Congratulations. You are now officially washed, dressed, and emotionally scarred, and it's still only mid. You step out of the bathhouse, or the outhouse, or your own damp reality, and squint at the midday light, which feels more like a soft interrogation from the sun, filtered through layers of soot chimney, smoke, and existential dread. You are officially clean for now, and your reward is navigating the rest of your Victorian day without immediately becoming filthy again, which is impossible because the air itself is sticky with coal, dust, horse breath, and the lingering odor of yesterday's stew, which was mostly potato. And hope you begin your walk toward the local marketplace, which is not a place of abundance, but rather a slightly organized chaos of shouting, bartering, and things that used to be food, now being sold as food again. You pass a meat stall where something vaguely ham-shaped dangles in the open, air collecting flies, stories, and probably diseases. A woman in a bonnet inspects it by poking it with a stick and nodding solemnly like she understands its secrets. A few stalls down, a man is selling something called puddings, which contain no dessert and possibly no legal ingredients. They jiggle ominously in the heat, and you decide to move on before one of them blinks at you now. You might be wondering why no one seems overly concerned with hygiene, and the answer is mostly because germ theory is still getting its learner's permit. Victorians believe in miasma, the idea that bad smells cause illness, and to be fair, most bad smells in this era could make you want to die anyway, so it kind of tracks. Let me know in the comments if you've ever fought the urge to sanitize your screen while watching this, because we're only getting started now that you've survived the meat fog and cabbage mist of the marketplace. It's time to think about hydration, which in Victorian times was a dangerous game. The water supply is a thrilling roulette of cholera, typhoid, lead poisoning, and that peculiar tang of decomposing optimism. So most people drink beer or gin, or in particularly sad moments, vinegar diluted with more vinegar. Tea is a safer option because boiling water kills most of the things that want to live in your digestive system. But tea is expensive, and so is sugar, so you end up sipping something that tastes like boiled shoe leather and pretending it's refreshing you by a small loaf of bread, which is technically edible if you chew slowly and ignore the occasional crunch that might be a seed, or might be a rat tooth, who's to say? And as you eat, you realize that your hands are now sticky from the bread and everything else you've touched since leaving the house, which includes, but is not limited to, several coins, 2 doorknobs, a chicken feather, and what you hope was a fig before we go on. Ask yourself, would you rather use a Victorian public toilet or shake hands with someone who just came from one and doesn't know what a germ is? Before you answer, consider that the Victorian idea of washing hands before meals was mostly a theoretical gesture, unless you were wealthy enough to afford servants who reminded you that your fingers were not in fact napkins now that lunch has happened. If you can call it that, it's time to return home, and by home I mean the brick rectangle where you sleep, eat, cough, and wait for the next fog bank to carry off someone you love. You enter the narrow hallway that smells faintly of cabbage sweat and ghostly damp, and climb the stairs, which creak with the solemnity of a man about to confess something unpleasant. The sitting room is occupied by your uncle, who may or may not be alive, but is definitely snoring with conviction on a chair that hasn't been dusted since the Great Reform Act of 1832. The hearth is cold because coal is expensive, And you already burned your old shoes for warmth last week, so you throw on another layer of wool which smells like it remembers your childhood and every bad decision since. Then you sit on the edge of a bench that was designed by someone who hated comfort and consider reading the newspaper, which is filled with things you already know, like the price of bread going up, the sewer workers being on strike, and the Queen still existing, but you read it anyway because reading is the only bath your brain gets, and the smell of the pages, which were probably printed with ink derived from sadness and beetles, is oddly comforting. Now let's talk about general household cleanliness, which in Victorian times means scraping the worst off the top. And pretending the rest is rustic charm. Sweeping involves a broom made from twigs and broken promises, and mostly just moves dust from one location to another, sometimes into your lungs, other times under the rug where it joins its ancestors. You wipe down surfaces with a rag that used to be someone's handkerchief and smells like lemon if lemons were left to ferment in a pantry. With an open wound, there is no vacuum, only a carpet beater, which is a fancy term for whacking the furniture until it cries, and then congratulating yourself on a job well done. Walls are stained with smoke, ceilings bloom with mildew, and windows are technically transparent if you scrape hard enough, but honestly, most people prefer the privacy that comes with a permanent coal glaze. The air inside your home is thicker than gravy and occasionally produces a cough that sounds like a dying accordion. You light a lamp and wonder how much oil you can afford to use without missing dinner, and the answer is probably less than you want, because lamp oil is expensive and candles are only romantic if you ignore the fact that they smell like mutton and faint hopelessness. Now that your chores are done, or at least sufficiently ignored, it's time for afternoon errands, which means revisiting the outside world and its delightful chorus of filth, noise, and someone yelling about the price of fish. You pass a man selling hair tonic, which is 90% alcohol and 10% snake oil, and somehow more effective than most modern products. A woman offers you a tooth powder that smells like chalk and promises to whiten your smile, or possibly remove it entirely. And to boys, chase a dog into a puddle that might be mostly mud or might be mostly horse. There is no way to tell, and you do not want to test it. As you walk, you consider the smell again. Not a single smell, but a symphony of them, a nose opera of decay, laundry, and general moist discomfort. Your boots are damp again, even though it hasn't rained, which proves that Victorian streets can be wet through sheer willpower and community trauma. You duck into a shop that sells soap and candles and realize that both products are made from the same ingredients and possibly the same cauldron. Everything smells like old bacon and victory, and you make a mental note not to eat anything without checking the label twice, if it even has a label, because most items are just wrapped in brown paper and shouted about by the clerk behind the counter who hasn't shaved since the last eclipse and may be using the same soap he's selling now that your arms are full of waxy promise and hygiene ambition. You return home again to a place that smells marginally better than the street and sit by the cold hearth waiting for the daylight to dim and the real darkness to begin, the kind that creeps in slowly with the fog and settles in your bones like mildew with an agenda. You sit by the cold hearth as the daylight begins to fade, not that you were using it for much anyway, because Victorian sunlight mostly serves to highlight how much soot is clinging to the lace curtains and how every piece of furniture appears to be upholstered in a fine layer of coal, dust, and disappointment. The shadows lengthen across the room, like a slow, encroaching dampness, which is ironic because the damp never really left it, just waits patiently under floorboards, inside walls. And sometimes inside you, the lamp is lit with a match that sparks more than your dinner ever did, and for a moment, you enjoy the flickering glow before it reveals the true scale of filth in your living space, including the pile of rags you call clothes, the pile of dishes you call tomorrow's problem, and the pile of rags you forgot are actually your sleeping uncle now that the evening has arrived, and the air smells of soot lard and long-dead ambitions. It's time to begin the process of getting ready for bed, a term which here means attempting to survive the night without freezing, sneezing, or being eaten by rodents. First, you change out of your day clothes, which have fused with your body through a complex combination of sweat, starch, and class oppression, and into your night clothes, which are identical to your day clothes, except sadder and slightly more flammable. You wash your face in the same gray basin you used this morning, which has now developed a new texture and a suspicious floating object that might be soap or might be a peeled thumb. You pretend not to notice and dab yourself dry with a cloth that hasn't been washed since before gas lights were installed in the neighborhood and smells like old cheese. With ambition now, you crawl into bed, which is a generous term for the wooden frame mattress and pile of despair that you call sleeping quarters. The straw inside pokes through the fabric like it resents being part of your life, and the blanket is technically made of wool, but feels like it was woven from disappointment and dry scabs. The sheets were once white, probably back when Napoleon was still causing problems, and now they're the color of moral ambiguity with a touch of egg yolk. The pillow is a canvas bag filled with something that might have been feathers at some point, but now acts more like lumpy accusations from your ancestors. You curl up into the tightest position possible, not because you're cold, which you are, but because your bed is built to accommodate someone who died shorter than you and never complained. You stare at the ceiling, which drips with condensation and the occasional bug, and wonder if tonight will be the night the roof caves in, or if that honor is reserved for Christmas. Before you doze off, you listen to the familiar sounds of Victorian nighttime misery, the rats in the walls arguing about territory, the upstairs neighbor coughing with a rhythm that suggests internal rot, the distant whistle of a night watchman too tired to care, and the soft rustle of your own thoughts, wondering if you should have joined the Navy. After all, speaking of which, let's take a moment to discuss how lighting worked or didn't during this time, because once the sun went down, you had three options: stumble blindly through the dark, set something on fire, or spend an entire week's wages on a single oil lamp that smelled like burnt regret and was more likely to set your curtains ablaze. Then illuminate your diary entries, which are mostly just complaints about soup and corsets anyway. If you were lucky, you had a candle which flickered romantically until you realized it was attracting moths and possibly ghosts. If you were unlucky, you had to borrow your neighbor's lamp, which was attached to their hand and came with commentary about how they did it better in Yorkshire. You blow out the flame and the darkness swallows everything, including your self-respect. The cold sets in like a slow accusation, and you pull the blanket tighter around you, pretending it helps. It doesn't it? just shifts the chill from your spine to your toes, which promptly curl in protest, and stay that way until morning. If you had money, you might own a bed warmer, a metal pan filled with hot coals, which you would drag across the sheets to make them slightly less arctic. But you don't have money, so you use a hot brick or a warm potato or a very patient cat, if you can catch one that hasn't already frozen in place. Now let's talk about night hygiene, because yes, technically there are things you should do before sleeping, but the Victorian version of brushing your teeth is rinsing with gin and muttering a quick prayer for your molars. The idea of flossing is met with confusion, suspicion, and occasionally violence, and mouthwash is more of a post-plague superstition. You might comb your hair if you're feeling fancy, or if you suspect something is living in it and trying to signal. Ships off the coast, your feet remain unwashed, because removing socks would also remove a layer of skin and possibly your will to live. If nature calls in the night, you have a few options: stumble to the shared privy and risk frostbite rats and existential horror, or use the chamber pot and risk spilling it all over your only pair of socks. Either way, your dignity takes a blow, and the smell stays with you like a cursed relative. Now you're finally ready to sleep, if you can call it that. Victorian sleep is less a restful state and more a series of micro-panics interrupted by the distant clatter of hooves, someone yelling about gin, and your lungs trying to evacuate your chest without permission. The mattress creaks every time you blink, and the bedbugs begin their nightly feast at around midnight, precisely as if summoned by an invisible but punctual curse. You lie awake listening to the drip of condensation from the windowsill and the far-off sound of something screaming, probably a cat, possibly a human, and you wonder whether you locked the door, not because of burglars, but because the neighbor's son has night terrors and once wandered in with a cabbage and a Bible muttering about sin. Eventually sleep takes you not like a gentle wave, but more like being mugged in an alley and left in a barrel of porridge. You will wake up sore, confused, and smelling faintly of damp wool and something that might be sadness. But for now, congratulations. You've survived another day of Victorian hygiene. Your dreams, if they come at all, are not peaceful flights of imagination, but more like silent black and white plays performed by your subconscious using props stolen from your worst memories. You dream of leaking ceilings, of rats chewing through your boots, of endless stairs that only go down, and of a man made entirely of soap standing silently at the foot of your bed, whispering things like the drain is clogged with your hope. You jolt awake, covered in a layer of sweat that smells faintly of onions, despair, and whatever your blanket absorbed from the walls, and you realize it's still the middle of the night, and the candle has gone out, and something is moving just under your bed, or inside the walls, or inside your brain, and that something sounds like either a mouse or a metaphor for your future. You lie, still clutching your pillow, which has gone cold and lumpy, like a fish that's been judged by God, and you wonder if you're actually sick because your head feels heavy. Your nose is clogged with soot, and your throat tastes like you gargled fireplace water, and regret. In Victorian times, this could mean a cold, or it could mean death, and either way, your best option is to wait and see if the cough worsens, or if you begin hallucinating angels, or if you just stop waking up entirely. Illness is treated with a fascinating mix of bravery, ignorance, and brandy. If you're lucky, someone will boil a kettle and make a broth that smells like shoe leather and anxiety. If you're unlucky, someone will slap leeches on your chest and tell you to think positive thoughts while your lungs attempt to exit your body via a persistent wheeze. If you have money, you can summon a doctor who will enter dramatically sniff once and declare you have the vapors, then prescribe you mercury and a firm handshake, and leave with your last 2 shillings. If you don't have money, you will be tended by your aunt, who believes strongly in herbal teas that taste like boiled broomsticks, and in wrapping your feet in newspapers to draw out the illness. If your fever gets worse, someone will pour vinegar on your forehead, light a candle under your bed, and loudly discuss your will while you pretend to be asleep and hope the angel of death forgot your address. Now, let's talk about what happens when you can't sleep, which is most nights, because Victorian insomnia is less a medical issue and more a spiritual crisis. The air is thick with soot, the mattress squeaks every time you blink, and somewhere in the building, a baby is crying like it knows the end of the world. Personally, you roll over onto your other side and are greeted by the cold, damp wall, which feels like being hugged by a sad sponge. Your joints ache from the mattress, your nose whistles like a broken kettle, and the chamber pot is definitely full and judging you from the corner. Your brain decides this is the perfect time to recall every embarrassment you've ever had since birth, and a few you inherited from your ancestors, like that time your father accidentally bowed to a cow during the Queen's parade. You stare into the darkness, and the darkness stares back, and you realize that you are now wide awake, surrounded by the quiet chaos of Victorian nightlife, which includes drunken singing, someone vomiting in the alley, and the long, slow creak of floorboards, which might mean rats, might mean burglars, or might just be the building settling deeper into its own misery. If you are truly desperate, you might light a candle and attempt to read, but the flickering flame casts shadows that look like accusing ghosts, and the book you reach for is full of moral tales about chimney sweeps who found Jesus and then died of dysentery, which isn't helping you fall asleep, but does make you feel grateful that at least you're not also a metaphor for public morality. Now let's say you finally doze off sometime near dawn. The light filtering through the cracked window is gray, weak and filled with soot. It lands on your face like a cold, damp glove and wakes you just in time to begin the entire miserable dance all over again. Your joints protest, your lungs rattle, your mouth tastes like a chimney that lost a bet, and your first conscious thought is, did I die? Followed closely by no worse, I lived through another night of Victorian hygiene. You sit up, slowly, trying not to jostle the bedbugs into action, and swing your legs over the edge of the bed into the cold embrace of a floor that has not known warmth since the Napoleonic Wars. The chamber pot greets you like an old enemy, and you try not to gag as you empty it into the tin bucket that will later be carried down 4 flights of stairs and flung into the street. With a prayer and a small scream, you pull on your clothes, which have not dried properly and smell like someone cried into a fireplace, and you begin your walk toward the basin, where the water has gone stiff and possibly sentient, and you realize that this is it. This is what health looks like in the Victorian age. Not absence of disease, but the ability to keep going despite the disease chewing softly on your toes. You rinse your face and begin again. Clean is a lie, comfort is a myth, and good dreams are reserved for the dead. But you still put on your boots and face the morning, because that is what Victorian hygiene demands. Suffer in silence and maybe boil your socks if you get the chance. You stumble out into the gray morning, dragging yourself through streets that have already been claimed by coal dust and the scent of last night's burnt porridge. You are dressed in the same layers of wool and regret as yesterday, only now they are slightly stiffer with the addition of grime and whatever crawled onto you during the night. Your boots thud against cobblestones slick with mud, horse manure, and something that might be old cheese or a metaphor for your life. You passed the factory gates where a line of men and boys stand, waiting, their faces pale with exhaustion and hands stained with a permanent layer of soot or something worse. You join the queue, which smells like a mixture of sweat, despair, and boiled cabbage. You try not to think about how the air inside will be thicker than the fog outside, but it is too late because the gate swings open and you shuffle inside to be greeted by the clang of machinery and the constant rain of soot that settles into every crack and fold of your clothes and skin. The workday begins with the ritual of putting on your protective gear, which is mostly a ragged scarf tied over your mouth and a pair of gloves that may or may not be intact. You enter the belly of the beast, a coal mine or a factory or a cheese mummification plant, depending on your luck, where the air tastes like burnt rubber and broken dreams. Your lungs ache with every breath as you navigate narrow tunnels or cramped workshops surrounded by clanging metal, hissing steam, and the low moans of your coworkers, all of whom look like ghosts and smell like they've been dipped in dirt and despair. During breaks, you retreat to a corner to eat whatever scraps you managed to smuggle from home, often stale bread and something vaguely meat-shaped that you hope is not sentient. You try to ignore the rat that eyes your lunch with what can only be described as professional interest. The hours drag on your hands, bleed from handling tools designed without human comfort in mind. Your back stiffens and your knees plead for mercy, and the only thing keeping you going is the faint hope that once the whistle blows, you can return to your damp home, where at least the misery is familiar and predictable. If you work in the fields, your story is slightly different, but no less grim. You rise before dawn, your hands already chapped from yesterday, and you trudge through mud to tend to animals that smell worse than the average human, and fields that resemble something a painter would call depressing realism. Your tasks include feeding cows that fart with alarming enthusiasm, collecting eggs from nests that contain everything except the chicken you hoped for, and chasing goats that have developed a surprising taste for your socks. Your clothes are stained with everything from manure to sorrow, and your boots leak. As if in protest to your continued optimism, the midday sun is, or hoping the rain falls at the right time so you can stand outside and pretend washing means something other than wetting your hair. The day ends with aching muscles, a face smudged with coal dust or hay, and the faint sense that tomorrow will be just as relentless as today. As you leave work, your thoughts drift toward dinner, which you eat quickly because tomorrow demands you be up and miserable early again. Now, before we move on, tell me in the comments, what was the worst job you ever had or can imagine having? Because Victorian labor makes modern hardship look like a spa day, and honestly, I think we all need to take a moment to appreciate that you are not currently hauling coal or scraping cheese off ancient barrels. Congratulations, you've survived another day in Victorian hygiene and labor. You wake up to the sounds of children which in Victorian times means a chorus of coughing, sneezing, and the occasional scream, because childhood was less about innocence and more about surviving until lunch. Your morning begins with the ritual of dressing, which involves wrangling tiny limbs into layers of stiff fabric, and frequently failing because children are stubborn and the clothes are not designed for comfort or cooperation. You brush their hair, which is a test of patience and dental hygiene, which is largely a myth at best. They rinse their mouths with water that has seen more mouths than the local pub, and at worst they gnaw on whatever crumbly substance passes for a toothbrush, which might be a twig or a cloth wrapped around a finger. You try to avoid eye contact with their feet, because socks are rarely worn and shoes even more rarely fitted than file off to school, which is an exercise in controlled chaos. The buildings are crowded, poorly ventilated, and filled with the smell of unwashed bodies, chalk dust, and fear. The desks are hard, and the lessons strict, and the breaks are a mad dash to avoid lice, which is the real plague of Victorian childhood. These lice infestations are legendary in both scale and ferocity. Children scratch incessantly, their scalps become red and raw, and the schools try various remedies, none of which work particularly well, including smearing hair with mixtures of vinegar, kerosene, and sometimes burnt alum, which smells like a funeral pyre and does little except make the lice furious. You watch as a small boy is dragged out by his mother, who brandishes a comb that looks more like a medieval torture device, and proceeds to hunt the pests with a grim determination. The playground is less a place of fun and more a battlefield of hygiene wars, where sharing hats or hair ribbons is considered an act of biological terrorism. You might think this misery is confined to the poor, but even the children of the wealthy face their own version, which involves elaborate hairdos that trap dust and the occasional rat or two, and daily baths that are more ritual than refreshment. School lunches are typically a slice of bread and maybe a piece of cheese or an apple, which you quickly learn to hide to avoid the scorn of your peers. The days are long, filled with strict discipline and lessons on manners, hygiene, and morality, which are often taught by teachers who look like they themselves have never encountered soap. Your afternoons might be spent running errands, helping with household chores, or in the case of poorer children, working in factories or as chimney sweeps, which is a terrifying job involving crawling into dark, sooty spaces and hoping to emerge alive and not covered in more soot than before. The evenings bring homework, which means copying lines of text by candlelight, often interrupted by coughing fits and the ever-present itch of lice. As you tuck the children into bed, you worry about the next day, the cold nights, the damp sheets, and the constant threat of illness, which, in Victorian times, is less a possibility and more an eventuality, but you also find moments of tenderness. Small hands holding yours, a whispered good night, a shared hope that someday things will be different. Before you leave the nursery, you pause and look at the worn faces of these little warriors who battle filth, cold, and indifference with a bravery that feels almost heroic, and you realize that Victorian childhood hygiene was not about cleanliness, but survival, and that is a legacy worth remembering. You wake up feeling unwell, which in Victorian times means you are instantly part of a long tradition of suffering marked by dubious medical advice and a parade of smells that range from disinfectant to despair. You are rushed to the local hospital, or more accurately, the place where the dying go, hoping to survive, Because hospitals, then, are less about healing and more about organized chaos, with beds crammed together in rooms that smell like boiled cabbage and unwashed hope. The doctors and nurses are overwhelmed by the endless flow of patients, many of whom arrive with injuries, infections, or diseases that modern medicine could treat with a shrug. Here they are met with leeches, bleeding cups, and poultices, which are basically glorified bandages soaked in mystery liquids, some of which might actually cure you, and others that are guaranteed to make you question your life choices. Been used on a dozen previous patients. Without so much as a rinse, you are strapped to a table by strangers who mumble prayers while wielding saws, scalpels, and a terrifying enthusiasm for amputation. Your screams echo through the halls, which are lined with straw and despair, and the air is thick with the scent of ether and bad decisions. Recovery means lying in a bed shared with multiple strangers, all coughing, spitting, and occasionally screaming as infections spread unchecked, and nurses attempt to comfort with a mixture of kindness and exhaustion. You hear stories of miraculous recoveries, but also of those who slipped away quietly into the night. Remedies offered to you, which might include drinking concoctions made from herbs, minerals, and sometimes crushed gems, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds, and the ingestion of pills that taste like powdered regret. Your body aches, your mind races between hope and despair, and you find yourself bargaining with whatever higher power you believe in to just make it stop, or at least make the nurses stop smelling like they bathed in vinegar and broken dreams. Now let me ask you in the comments, what's the worst medical treatment you've ever heard of or experienced? Because Victorian medicine will challenge your imagination and your stomach. After days or weeks in this infernal place, you are either sent home to recover, which means returning to a world full of dirt, cold, and uncertainty, or you succumb to the ravages of disease, becoming just another statistic in a ledger that few want to read but many fear to escape. Hospitals are places of last resort, and even then your chances are slim, but you hold on to the hope that tomorrow will bring a better prognosis, or at least fewer leeches and more sympathy. If you survive, you return to your damp home, where you wash with cold water and hope that your neighbors are not also ill or planning to borrow your chamber pot without asking. Hygiene in illness is a constant battle, and you learn quickly that rest is a luxury few can afford, and cleanliness an aspiration most can't meet. As you lie back on your straw mattress, surrounded by the familiar smells of soot, sweat, and faintly sour linen, you reflect on the strange world of 19th century cures, where science mingles uneasily with superstition, and every treatment is a gamble with fate. And sometimes you wonder if the true cure was simply the will to keep going despite everything, because Victorian hygiene was not just about washing or clean clothes, but about surviving the impossible with a stubbornness that borders on heroic. Congratulations, you've survived another grim chapter in Victorian history. You wake to the news that someone you know has died, which in Victorian times is both shock and expectation, because death is never far, and funerals are less about celebration and more about grim necessity. You enter a world where the dead are treated with a mixture of reverence, fear, and an unfortunate lack of sanitation. The body is washed, which sounds simple, but in practice involves a ritual performed by family or undertakers, who wear gloves that might be leather or just stained cloth, and Use sponges soaked in perfumed water which barely masks the scent of decay. You watch as they dress the corpse in its finest. Clothes often stiff with starch and possibly moths, and lay it out in the parlor where the family gathers to sit with the body, sometimes for days, while friends come and go whispering condolences and speculating on the afterlife. The air is thick with flowers, which are chosen not just for beauty, but for their supposed ability to ward off evil spirits or mask unpleasant odors. The coffin is usually made of wood and sometimes lined with velvet, which offers little comfort but at least hides the smell until burial. The funeral itself is a procession through streets that are muddy and crowded with mourners who wear black from head to toe, which in Victorian fashion means layers of fabric designed to suffocate and express grief. Simultaneously, the clergyman reads from the Bible in a voice that tries to be comforting but often sounds like a lecture on sin and mortality. You follow the coffin to the churchyard or cemetery, which are crowded places filled with graves, so close that the dead almost seem to be gossiping with each other about the living. You notice the tombstones, which range from simple markers to elaborate monuments covered in statues, angels, and poetic inscriptions that try to capture a life in a few words, but mostly just remind you that death is inevitable and often unpleasant. The burial itself is quick, sometimes rushed, due to the smell or the threat of disease, and you wonder how the soil can hold so much sorrow without breaking open to swallow the whole city. The living cope with loss in many ways, some through religion, hoping for reunion in heaven, others through social rituals like wearing mourning clothes, which can last months or even years and effectively make your wardrobe a shrine to sadness. You see families erect mourning jewelry made from hair or other keepsakes, which might sound creepy but was considered a touching tribute and a way to keep a piece of the dead close to the heart. Children are shielded from the harshest realities, but even they learn early that death is a visitor with poor manners who comes without warning and stays too long. The grieving process is complicated by the lack of modern psychology, which means people often suffer in silence or express their pain through elaborate public displays that can feel performative but also genuine. You attend wakes where stories about the deceased mix with tears, laughter, and occasionally scandal as people try to make sense of mortality through memory and community. The smell of incense, candles, and damp earth permeates everything, and you realize that Victorian death hygiene was about managing decay in body and spirit, with rituals designed to give meaning to loss. Even if the meaning is sometimes lost in the fog of grief and coal dust, the living carry on their lives with an awareness that death lurks in every corner, but also a stubborn hope that life, however dirty and short, is worth the effort. So before we move on, let me know in the comments if you have any stories of Victorian funerals or family mourning, because these rituals reveal a lot about how people faced the ultimate hygiene challenge, the end. Congratulations, you've survived yet another chapter in the messy, unwashed reality of Victorian life. You wake up and consider the day ahead, which means choosing an outfit that will both announce your social status and quietly suffocate you in equal measure. Victorian fashion is less about comfort and more about armor, layers of fabric stiffened with starch and dread trap sweat, dust, and every odor you've collected since last laundry day, which is, to say not recently, Corsets make a triumphant return as the torturers of the torso. They cinch your waist so tightly that breathing becomes an act of rebellion, and sitting down requires the flexibility of a contortionist. You pull yourself into the bodice, feeling the boning press like a dozen tiny executioners against your ribs, while the layers of petticoats weigh you down like the accumulated shame of every social expectation your skirts dragged behind. You collecting grime street dust and the occasional discarded potato peel, which you wear proudly as a badge of authenticity. Gentlemen sport heavy wool suits, often in colors that could best be described as persistent gloom, their collars starched to an unyielding rigidity that invites chafing and sore necks. You might carry a top hat, which, while fashionable, doubles as a dust collector and a convenient place to store your dreams, which will soon be flattened alongside it if you venture outside. Prepare for the smog, which settles on your clothing like a permanent cloak of despair. The soot stains your gloves and leaves a residue that even the best laundress can't quite remove. Hats are tipped to acquaintances who probably smell worse than you, and handkerchiefs are whipped out with a flourish that masks the fact that no one has washed their face in days. The obsession with cleanliness is complicated by the reality that washing your clothes meant dismantling your entire outfit and risking losing pieces forever or unleashing a laundry disaster of biblical proportions. Soap was harsh on fabric, and water was often cold or contaminated, so you patched and primped and prayed your stains were fashionable. Rather than fatal, you might apply perfume heavily to cover the general funk of daily life, which only adds another layer to the complex scent profile of Victorian society, a blend of sweat, soot, and roses with a hint of decay. Now let's talk about shoes, which are rigid and unforgiving, often causing blisters and infections, but were a necessary evil to traverse. The muddy streets, the wealthy might wear polished leather, but even that doesn't protect them from the grime of city life or the smell of horse manure mixed with the hopes of the poor and the dreams of the ambitious. Children's clothing was a nightmare of buttons, snaps, and layers designed to make dressing an endurance test. And bedtime, a liberation from fabric tyranny. The pursuit of fashion often trumped hygiene, leading to skin irritation, lice infestations hidden under elaborate hairstyles, and a general state of discomfort that was accepted as normal. Social gatherings were exercises in maintaining appearances. The scent of boiled cabbage was masked with eau de toilette and polite laughter. The desire to appear clean was constant, but rarely achieved, which created a fascinating paradox where everyone pretended to be immaculate while secretly envying those who managed to hide their grime best before social events. You might spend hours in preparation, which mostly means adjusting your corset and praying you don't faint from lack of oxygen. During the inevitable crowded dance or dinner party, you plaster on smiles and maintain posture, despite the physical agony, because to be fashionable was to suffer, and Victorian society valued suffering above all else. Before we move on, tell me in the comments, what's the strangest or most uncomfortable outfit you've ever wet to wear, because Victorian fashion sets the bar incredibly high for misery and dedication. Congratulations, you've survived another thread in the tangled fabric of Victorian hygiene and style. You sit down at the dining table, which is less a place of comfort and more an arena of culinary risk. The Victorian meal is a carefully orchestrated event where the appearance of sophistication often masks the presence of bacteria, mold, and occasionally the unexpected surprise of a rat or two. You pick up your silverware, which has been polished to a shine, but never quite feels clean enough to keep the persistent thoughts of disease at bay. The tablecloth might be stained with yesterday's regrets, and the napkin smells faintly of last week's cough. The food itself is a paradox. It looks rich and inviting, but beneath the surface lurks a world of hazards. The meat may have been preserved with chemicals or salted beyond recognition to mask. Spoilage vegetables are often wilted or coated with dirt that no amount of washing can remove, and the sauces might contain mysterious ingredients sourced from less than reputable kitchens. The kitchen is a place of organized chaos, where the cook battles heat, pests, and the constant threat of food poisoning. The preparation areas are rarely sanitized, and utensils are shared between raw and cooked foods, which is a recipe for disaster. If there ever was one, you eat with a certain degree of suspicion, watching the other diners for signs of illness or questionable hygiene habits. The dining rituals include lengthy toasts and polite conversation, which serve as distractions from the underlying terror of what you're actually consuming. You pass the food around and note how everyone tries to avoid the suspicious-looking casserole, but pretends to enjoy it out of social obligation. The beverages are equally treacherous. Beer might be safer than water, but it is still prone to contamination, and the gin flows freely as a disinfectant and courage booster. The aftermath of a meal often includes digestive discomfort and an unshakable feeling that you've just gambled with your health and lost, but the meal is necessary. Nourishment and a social glue that binds the fractured world of Victorian society. You clean your plate to avoid offending the host, and because waste is considered a sin worse than the food poisoning you might suffer later, you sit back and wait for the inevitable stomach grumbles and hope that your body will forgive you for this transgression. Before we move on, tell me in the comments, what's the weirdest or worst meal you've ever had? Because Victorian dining makes modern food scarce look like a picnic. Congratulations, you've survived another bite of Victorian hygiene and social survival. You decide it's finally time to wash, which in Victorian terms means embarking on a quest filled with obstacles, delays, and a lot of strategic planning, because bathing was less a daily ritual and more a rare luxury, usually reserved for the fortunate or the particularly determined. The first challenge is water, which might be drawn from a well, a river, or a communal pump, often cold and sometimes contaminated with more than just dirt. You prepare your bathing area, which could be a tin tub precariously balanced on crates in a cramped kitchen, or the infamous public bathhouse, a place equal parts sanctuary and social battlefield. The public bathhouse smells like a mixture of soap, rancid water, and suppressed anxiety. It is crowded, noisy, and lacking in privacy, but it offers a chance to scrub away days or weeks of grime and perhaps gossip about who showed up with lice or a suspicious rash. The bathhouse is segregated by class and gender, so you line up with others of your ilk, hoping to avoid unwanted interactions with strangers who might judge your hygiene or lack thereof. The water is lukewarm at best, and sometimes scalding hot, which makes washing a balancing act between comfort and survival. You soap up with a bar of soap that might have been recycled from a century ago, or made with ingredients you'd rather not think About you scrub vigorously, knowing that each peeker stroke is a small rebellion against the pervasive dirt and despair. The towels are thin and the drying areas drafty and cold, so you wrap yourself quickly and rush to your clothes, which somehow feel heavier after being damp and sometimes smell faintly of mildew or disinfectant. You might not bathe more than once a week or even once a month, depending on your circumstances, which means the battle against sweat, soot, and street grime is ongoing, and relentless. Soap itself is a luxury product used sparingly. The wealthy have scented varieties that promise freshness and virtue, but often just mask the odor of corsets and coal dust. The poor rely on homemade concoctions or trade soap with neighbors in a fragile dichotomy of cleanliness. In some circles, soap became a status symbol, a marker of respectability and moral standing. You carry your bar of soap with pride, but also paranoia, knowing that losing it is akin to losing your dignity. The politics of soap extend to gender roles, with women expected to maintain a certain level of cleanliness and appearance, often at great personal cost, while men are granted more leniency and encouraged to show ruggedness and resilience, which mostly means smelling worse but looking tougher. Public attitudes toward bathing are mixed. Some believe that too much washing will wash away health and vitality, while others view it as essential to survival. You hear stories of people who bathed daily being called eccentric or worse, while others suffer the consequences of neglect. The Victorian struggle to stay clean in a dirty world is a balancing act between necessity, social expectations, and harsh realities. As you finally step back into your daily life, feeling slightly lighter and vaguely hopeful, you realize that bathing is not just about removing dirt, but about reclaiming a piece of humanity in a world that often tries to strip it away. So before we move on, tell me in the comments what your own bathing rituals are, and if you've ever faced a challenge that made you appreciate clean water more. Congratulations, you've survived another splash of Victorian hygiene and social reality. You step outside into the bustling Victorian street, which is less a clean thoroughfare and more a river of refuse and regret. The waste disposal system is primitive at best and often non-existent at worst. The streets are lined with open gutters, filled with everything from human waste to rotten food to the occasional drowned rat. The smell is a thick, oppressive cloud that clings to your clothes and seems to seep into your very lungs. You avoid puddles, not just because they splash, but because they often contain more bacteria than a modern laboratory. Your chamber pot, if you're lucky, is emptied by a night soil man who carts away the contents in a bucket to be dumped somewhere out of sight and often downwind. Unfortunately, this means that the filth is frequently dumped into rivers or fields, contaminating water supplies and spreading disease. The sewer systems in many cities are a patchwork of tunnels and drains, designed more to move water quickly than to protect public health. They are often clogged with waste and debris, causing flooding and creating breeding grounds for pests. Rats, cockroaches, and flies thrive in this environment, spreading plague and cholera with alarming efficiency. The Great Stink of London in 1858 is a notorious example, when the River Thames became so polluted with sewage that the smell shut down the government and inspired major sanitary reforms. Before that, though, life continued much as before, with people resigned to the stink and the sickness. It's a constant battle between human waste and human habitation. A battle that the waste is winning most days. You watch as workers clean the streets with brooms and buckets of water, which mostly serves to move the filth around rather than remove it. The gutters overflow after rain, turning streets into muddy streams of misery, and you dodge carts loaded with garbage and broken furniture as the city tries to function despite the chaos. The poor live in the worst conditions, with cesspits overflowing into their homes and drinking water dangerously close to contamination. Outbreaks of typhoid, dysentery, and cholera are common and deadly. The wealthy try to distance themselves physically and socially from the filth, employing sewer workers and cleaners, but their mansions still smell faintly of smoke, soot, and anxiety. You might see the construction of new sewer systems as a marvel of engineering, but they are expensive, slow, and often insufficient to meet the needs of growing urban populations. Sanitation laws are passed and ignored, and the struggle to keep cities livable is ongoing. Amidst all this, the human spirit endures. You find small moments of hope in clean streets, in the efforts of reformers, and in the knowledge that even the worst of smells cannot completely erase the desire for a better life. So before we move on, tell me in the comments what city you live in and how your local sanitation compares, because Victorian sewage battles make modern garbage day seem like a celebration. Congratulations, you've survived another stinking chapter of Victorian hygiene and urban survival. You wake to the daunting reality that your clothes, which have spent the week collecting soot, sweat, and street grime, must be cleaned, which in Victorian times is less a chore and more a full-scale military operation. You gather your laundry, which includes everything from shirts and stockings to cravats and corset covers, each piece stained with a story of daily misery and survival. You prepare a wash tub, usually a large metal basin filled with water heated over a fire, but getting the water hot enough is a challenge in itself, often requiring several trips to the kitchen or communal boiling station. The soap you use might be homemade lye soap, which is harsh enough to strip skin off your fingers, but not always effective at removing stubborn stains. You soak the garments in the soapy water, which quickly turns murky with dirt, grease, and remnants of previous adventures. You scrub vigorously with washboards or brushes, fighting stubborn patches of mud, ink, and who knows what else. Some clothes require boiling to kill lice or remove particularly stubborn grime, which means carefully lowering delicate fabrics into scalding water, hoping they survive the ordeal intact. After hours of scrubbing, rinsing, and wringing out clothes, which leaves your hands raw and aching, you hang them outside, if weather permits, on a line or over railings. The air is often too polluted to help drying, and your clothes retain a faint smell of smoke and soot. Drying inside means dealing with dampness and mildew, which can ruin fabrics and your mood. The laundry process is complicated by limited resources, especially for the poor, who may share washing facilities and soap or trade labor in exchange for clean clothes. The upper classes have the luxury of servants who perform this grueling task, but even then, laundry day is dreaded because of the volume and complexity of their wardrobes. Intricate garments require careful handling and often special treatments to preserve fabrics and decorations. Meanwhile, the social importance of clean clothes cannot be overstated. Wearing clean clothes marks you as respectable and capable, in a society that equates appearance with morality and hygiene. Failing to present well can lead to social exclusion. Or worse, the irony is that even freshly laundered clothes may carry hidden dangers, from chemicals used in dyes to the lice and fleas that thrive in tight folds and layers. The act of laundering becomes a ritual of survival and dignity, a battle fought with brushes, soap, and sheer determination. Before we move on, let me know in the comments what your own laundry routine is, and if you've ever faced a stain that refused to die, because Victorian laundry makes modern chores look like spa days. Congratulations, you've survived another wash cycle in the saga of Victorian hygiene and social struggle. You wake up with a dull throb in your jaw, which, in Victorian times, could mean anything from a minor nuisance to the beginning of an excruciating ordeal, because dental care is a confusing patchwork of superstition, ignorance, and the occasional glimmer of scientific progress. Your morning routine involves reaching for a toothbrush, which is often nothing more than a rough cloth wrapped around a twig, or sometimes a primitive brush with bristles, made from the stiff hairs of a wild boar, imported at great expense and reserved for the wealthy, while the rest of society improvises with what they have. Your toothpaste is a gritty blend of crushed chalk, charcoal, or pulverized bones, sometimes scented with mint if you're fortunate, but often mixed with bizarre ingredients like powdered alum or burnt eggshells that promise whitening but often just taste like regret. You scrub your teeth with more hope than technique, trying to remove the layers of soot, food residue, and general filth that accumulate from days or weeks of irregular cleaning. Your gums bleed easily, and your mouth tastes like a battlefield where soot, bitter herbs, and decay wage a constant war. Sweets are a rare indulgence that bring fleetingly joy, but often invite the relentless advance of tooth decay and cavities, which are seen as inevitable punishments for overindulgence or poor morals. Around you, neighbors grimly perform tooth extractions using pliers or other crude tools, sometimes without anesthesia, sometimes with a swift jerk that leaves the victim gasping, and the crowd murmuring in sympathy or horror. Home remedies abound, some applying cloves crushed into paste, which provide momentary relief, others dabbing vinegar or salt into cavities, which is less about curing and more about resigning oneself to pain. The local dentist is both feared and revered. Consent dental surgery is a brutal affair, often performed in a single excruciating session, sometimes ending with infection, gangrene, or worse yet, death. But the alternative is living with relentless agony and a smile that warns others to keep their distance. Bad breath is not just a personal inconvenience, but a social death sentence. In Victorian society, where manners and appearances reign supreme, it can cause ostracism at gatherings, destroy romantic prospects, and even cost employment. So you carry a small container of aromatic powders or sniff a vial of pungent liquids made from herbs, spices, and sometimes alcohol, hoping to mask your natural state, which more closely resembles a mixture of coal dust, stale sweat, and decayed teeth. Are often stained yellow or black from tobacco consumption, poor hygiene, and the constant bombardment of soot and smoke. Losing teeth is so common that dentures and false teeth have become fashionable accessories, though often ill-fitting, uncomfortable, and prone to slipping at the worst moments. Advertisements for miraculous powders and pastes promising to whiten teeth or cure gum disease, flood newspapers and shop windows. These products are mostly scams, but they offer hope, distraction, and a temporary escape from grim reality. The social importance of a clean smile cannot be overstated. It signals health, respectability, and self-control in a society obsessed with appearances and morality. The quest for dental hygiene becomes a daily battle fought with rudimentary tools, grit, and a stubborn hope against overwhelming odds as you go about your day. You notice the countless subtle social signals based on teeth. Those with brighter, less decayed teeth command more respect. Those with missing or blackened teeth face polite avoidance, or worse, subtle whispers behind their backs. You hear the sound of grinding teeth in frustration, pain, or habit, a nervous tick, fueled by stress, soot, and the constant battle for survival. Dental care is a reflection of class as well. The wealthy have access to the few dentists who use anesthesia or better techniques. They can afford imported brushes and fancy pastes and have the leisure to maintain better hygiene while the poor suffer, quietly enduring pain and infection in silence. You learn to avoid the worst foods that might worsen your condition, and you trade tips on homemade remedies with neighbors. You practice better habits, hoping to delay the inevitable as long as possible. The emotional toll is significant as you battle embarrassment, pain, and the constant awareness that your smile betrays your hardships. Before we move on, let me know in the comments if you have any dental horror stories, home remedies you swear by, or if you've ever feared a dentist visit because Victorian teeth tell a story of struggle, survival, and stubborn humanity. Congratulations, you've survived another gnash and grind in the saga of Victorian hygiene and human endurance. You carry on your day, aware that your teeth and mouth are both a personal battleground and a social minefield. The dull ache persists beneath the surface, a constant reminder that at any moment the pain could erupt into a searing fire that forces you to clutch your jaw and wince through your daily tasks. You try to distract yourself by focusing on the mundane, the soot collecting on your sleeve, the persistent cough that rattles in your chest, the faint but stubborn odor that clings to your clothes. Despite your best efforts to wash it away, you make your way to the market, where the cacophony of hawkers shouting their wares blends with the occasional cough or sneeze from passers-by. Some clutch handkerchiefs, while others simply turn their faces away, hoping to avoid contagion. But in reality, disease spreads with cruel efficiency in crowded streets and poorly ventilated shops. The vendors display their produce with a mixture of pride and grim acceptance, knowing that freshness is often a fleeting luxury. The vegetables are wilted, the fruits bruised, and the meat aged beyond recognition, masked with generous amounts of salt and spices. You pick up an apple and try to ignore the lingering dirt under your nails and the flakes of skin that have fallen onto your coat. Earlier that day, you exchange pleasantries with the butcher, who eyes you with suspicion, a common gesture in an era when health is often equated with social worthiness and poverty is seen as a moral failing. You pass a public water pump where women queue patiently with buckets, their faces weary from endless labor, their hands cracked and raw from constant washing. But the water itself is a gamble, often contaminated by sewage or industrial waste. The idea of clean water is aspirational at best and often mocked by reality. The smell of coal smoke thickens as you near the factories where men, and sometimes children, toil toil in the shadows of enormous chimneys. The air is thick with soot and despair. Your mouth tastes bitter from the smoke and the ever-present dust that coats every surface. The factories are noisy. Dark places where safety is an afterthought and the risk of injury or illness is a daily companion. You think about the impact this environment has on your body, the constant inhalation of coal, dust, the grit lodged between your teeth and gums, and the slow erosion of health that so many accept as the price of survival. You decide to visit the dentist despite your fears. The appointment is a mixture of dread and hope. You enter a small, gloomy office filled with the smell of disinfectant and unwashed bodies. The dentist greets you brusquely, and you are soon strapped into a wooden chair that resembles an instrument of torture. The tools gleam menacingly on a nearby tray, and you wonder if your imagination is exaggerating or if the gleam hides more menace than medicine. The procedure begins quickly. A sharp tool probes the affected tooth, sending waves of pain through your skull. You grit your teeth and focus on your breathing. The drill buzzes and the forceps clamp down with a terrifying grip. You hear cracking and snapping as the tooth is extracted, a small victory that comes at the cost of bleeding gums and a swollen jaw. The dentist offers you a vial of tincture to ease the pain, and you clutch it gratefully, knowing that rest and recovery will be difficult. In a world that expects constant labor despite illness, you leave the office with a swollen face, a tender mouth, and a wary hope that the worst is behind you. The social stigma of poor dental hygiene weighs on you heavily. You avoid smiling in public and speak carefully to hide the gaps in your teeth. You notice others doing the same, a silent pact of survival and dignity in the face of adversity. The struggle to maintain oral health is just one of many battles you face daily. The clash between the need for hygiene and the harsh realities of Victorian life is relentless. You navigate crowded streets filled with the smells of sweat, smoke, and sewage. The constant threat of disease looms over every cough, every whispered rumor of an outbreak. You witness the resilience of your neighbors who endure similar hardships, who find moments of joy, laughter, and hope despite the grime and sorrow. The stories you share with friends about home remedies, peculiar diets, and dubious dentists become a form of camaraderie, a way to endure the indignities of daily existence. You marvel at the human spirit that persists even as bodies weaken and spirits falter. The irony of Victorian hygiene is that the very measures taken to maintain appearances often contributed to discomfort and illness. Corsets compress ribs and organs. Restricting breathing and circulation clothes are layered and heavy. Trapping heat and grime, public bathhouses are crowded and often unsanitary. Yet the desire to be clean and respectable drives people to these extremes. The battle with lice, fleas, and other pests is ongoing and exhausting. Hygiene is not a one-time act, but a continuous struggle against a world that offers little help. The scientific advances of the era promise improvements, but progress is slow and uneven. Many cling to old beliefs and superstitions, treating symptoms rather than causes, and often making problems worse. The social divide between rich and poor is stark, even in matters of hygiene. The wealthy have access to better facilities, cleaner water, and medical care, while the poor endure filth, overcrowding, and neglect. This disparity reinforces social hierarchies and fuels shame, guilt, and resentment. You observe how Victorian society obsessively polices cleanliness as a marker of moral character, blaming victims of poverty and illness for their condition while ignoring systemic failures. You find solace in small acts of kindness, the sharing of soap or clean water, the exchange of advice or a sympathetic ear, the determination to survive and maintain dignity despite the odds. The day wanes, and you return to your cramped dwelling where the air is thick with smoke and damp. The bed is hard and the blankets scratchy, but it is your refuge, your sanctuary from the chaos outside. You prepare for rest, mindful of the aches and pains that will greet you in the morning, hoping that the routine of survival will continue a little longer. The story of Victorian dental hygiene is just one thread in the vast tapestry of a society struggling to balance hope, despair, cleanliness and filth, dignity and suffering, progress and stagnation. As you close your eyes, you reflect on the resilience required to endure the indignities of daily life and the quiet heroism of those who face these challenges without complaint or despair. You understand that Victorian hygiene was not a simple matter of soap and water, but a complex dance with a world that often seemed determined to defeat you. Yet, despite everything, the human spirit endured and sometimes even thrived, ready to face another day in the unwashed, gritty, relentless reality of Victorian existence. You awake with the persistent ache in your jaw, a dull, relentless reminder of battles fought and lost beneath the surface, where decay and neglect wage war against whatever fragile piece you manage to claim with your makeshift toothbrush fashioned from a twig wrapped in fraying cloth, or in rare, fortunate moments, a coarse, bristled brush, imported and priced beyond reason. You smear the gritty pastes concocted from crushed chalk, pulverized bones, burnt eggshells, or charred charcoal, sometimes scented faintly with mint, if luck is on your side, but often carrying the bitter tang of desperation. Your hands work, mechanically scrubbing away layers of soot, sweat, and the remnants of yesterday's questionable meal. Your gums bleed easily, a crimson testament to your efforts, while your mouth tastes like a battlefield littered with ash-bitter herbs, and the faint, metallic sting of infection sweets are a double-edged sword, a rare momentary pleasure that invites the creeping menace of cavities and pain. You watch as neighbors grimly extract teeth with pliers or apply dubious homemade remedies involving cloves, vinegar, or mercury treatments that seem to promise relief but might just as easily hasten the journey to the grave. The local dentist looms in your mind, a figure, part healer, part executioner, wielding drills and forceps with scant concern for comfort and even less for bedside manner. The procedure is brutal, a swift wrenching that brings tears and blood, often followed by days of swelling infection and the fearful anticipation of what tooth will fail next. Bad breath is a social death sentence, worse than soot-stained clothes or tattered garments. It alienates friends, lovers, and employers alike. So you carry small vials of aromatic powders or pungent tinctures made from a blend of herbs, spices, and spirits, hoping to mask the coal dust, sweat, and decay that clings stubbornly to your breath. Your teeth bare, the stains of tobacco, neglect, and the grime of a life spent in smog and soot. Losing them is common enough that dentures and false teeth have become fashionable, if uncomfortable, accessories. Advertisements promising miraculous cures, whitening powders, and painless extractions flood newspapers and shop. Windows, though most are scams, offering little more than hope, distraction, and a momentary respite from grim reality. The social importance of a clean smile is profound. It signals health, morality, and self-control in a world obsessed with appearances. You navigate your days wary of subtle social signals, the sidelong glances at your yellowing teeth, the polite avoidance of conversation when you speak. Your struggle to maintain oral hygiene is just one battle in a relentless war against dirt disease. And despair, you move through crowded streets filled with the scents of sweat, smoke, and sewage, the threat of illness. A constant shadow over every cough, whispered rumor, and sudden death. You witness the resilience of neighbors who endure similar hardships, finding fleeting moments of laughter, hope, and solidarity amid the grime and sorrow. The stories you share about home remedies, dubious dentists, and personal miseries become bonds that help endure the indignities of daily existence. The irony of Victorian hygiene is that the very rituals designed to maintain appearances often contribute to discomfort and illness. Corsets, compressed ribs and organs, restricting breath and circulation, clothes trap, heat, grime, and pests. Public bathhouses are crowded and often unsanitary, yet the desire for respectability drives many to these extremes. Lice, fleas, and other pests wage their own war, making hygiene a constant, exhausting struggle. Scientific advances promise improvement, but progress is slow and patchy. Many cling to old beliefs, treating symptoms rather than causes, often exacerbating problems. Class divides magnify the disparities. The wealthy enjoy cleaner water, better facilities, and access to medical care, while the poor suffer filth, overcrowding, and neglect. This gap reinforces social hierarchies and fuels shame, guilt, and resentment. The obsession with cleanliness becomes a tool of moral judgment, blaming victims while ignoring systemic failure. Small acts of kindness, sharing soap or water, offering advice or sympathy, provide rare solace. You marvel at the human spirit that persists as bodies weaken and spirits falter. The day's labors finally done, you retreat to your cramped, damp refuge, thick with smoke and the weight of coal, dust, the bed hard, the blankets scratchy yet. It is sanctuary from the chaos beyond. You prepare for the fitful rest ahead, mindful of aches, pains, and the relentless challenges of tomorrow. The story of Victorian dental hygiene is but one thread in a vast tapestry of suffering, resilience, progress, and despair. It reveals the quiet heroism of those who endure with little complaint, the delicate dance between hope and reality that defines Victorian existence as night deepens. You reflect on the paradox of hygiene in this world where survival depends not just on washing and brushing, but on courage, determination, and sometimes sheer luck. You know tomorrow will bring more grime, more battles, more struggles, but also moments of humanity, shared laughter, and the stubborn refusal to be defeated. In this unwashed, relentless, gritty age, the human spirit endures, ready once more to face the coal smoke, dust, and aching teeth of another day. The morning light creeps through the grimy window, casting faint, pale shadows over the cramped room, where you awaken, still nursing the lingering ache in your jaw, a reminder that yesterday's battle with decay is far from over. The sensation is a dull throb that pulses beneath your cheekbone and promises little relief as you prepare for another day in this relentless world of soot and sweat. The act of rising becomes a cautious negotiation between aching muscles, stiff joints, and the reality that every movement is a small trial of endurance. You run your tongue over your teeth, probing for new pain or loose fragments that might threaten to break free during the day ahead. Your makeshift toothbrush awaits the same humble routine, the rough cloth wrapped around a twig that serves as your only tool against the accumulating grime, the pastes you concoct with what little you can find gritty. Mixtures of crushed chalk, charcoal, and the occasional crushed herb offer little respite, but provide a ritual, a sense of control in a life often bereft of such things you scrabble together. Your clothing, the heavy woolen fabrics, thick layers that trap the pervasive filth of city life, yet mark you as respectable enough to face the world beyond your door. You adjust your corset tightly, knowing that though it squeezes your ribs and restricts your breathing, it also grants the appearance of dignity and order that Victorian society demands. As you step outside, the air greets you heavy with the smell of coal, smoke, horse manure, and the omnipresent stench of human waste. The streets are alive with the noisy bustle of vendors, hawkers, and laborers. The cobblestones, slick with mud, refuse and discarded remnants of meals past. You move carefully to avoid puddles that shimmer with rainbow hues, betraying their toxic contents. Your path takes you past open gutters, filled with the day's accumulation of filth, a flowing testament to the failure of any proper sanitation. The calls of street children blend with the coughs of factory workers, many wearing rags stained with soot and sweat. The city is a sprawling organism, struggling to contain its own decay and desperation. You pass by the local public bathhouse, a place of both relief and dread, where the scent of soap mingles uneasily with body odor and the anxious whispers of patrons fearful of exposure to lice and disease inside the bathhouse. The water is lukewarm at best, often tepid and sometimes scalding, a communal vessel that promises cleanliness but delivers discomfort. The process is a balancing act between scrubbing away weeks of grime and maintaining the fragile health of skin already irritated by soot, smoke, and sweat. The towels are thin and scratchy. Drying is a race against the chill that creeps through the stone walls. You wrap yourself hastily in your damp clothes and step back into the biting air. The social dynamics of hygiene play out in every glance and gesture. The wealthy flaunt their scented soaps and imported linens, while the poor strive to conceal the evidence of their hardships with ingenuity and grace. Despite the odds, you press onward toward the market, a cacophony of sights, smells, and sounds assault your senses. The stalls overflow with produce that is often bruised, wilted, or dirt-coated, meat salted beyond recognition to mask spoilage, and breads dense with additives and age. You pick up an apple, its skin faintly dusty, and feel the weight of scarcity and survival in every bite. The vendors haggle with customers, their voices raised in practiced calls that blend desperation and hope. Around you, the mix of disease and poverty is palpable. Coughs and sneezes echo in narrow alleys, spreading invisible threats, while the city officials debate improvements that often fail to materialize. You meet the wary eyes of neighbors and strangers alike, each carrying their own burdens of dirt, discomfort, and the faint but persistent hope for better days. Your thoughts turn to food, hygiene, the dangers Hidden beneath the enticing facades of Victorian meals, the sauces thick with dubious ingredients, the meats salted and preserved in ways that defy modern sensibilities, the soups often watered down and thickened with starches. You eat with cautious appetite, aware that every morsel could be a test of fate. Ache in your mouth, the dental extraction still raw, the swollen gums tender to the touch. You clutch your jaw occasionally and wonder if the pain will ever cease, or if it is simply another companion in this gritty existence. The market gives way to the narrow streets of the industrial district, where factories belch smoke and the clang of machinery rings ceaselessly. The air is thick with soot and the grime of progress. The workers move with mechanical precision, some coughing, sputtering, others grim-faced but resigned. The threat of occupational illness is a specter that haunts every breath, every motion. You pass by a small apothecary window where advertisements for tooth powders and elixirs promise salvation for aching jaws and rotting teeth. Mostly scams, but a flicker of hope nonetheless. You consider the odd remedies whispered about in hushed conversations: cloves crushed into paste vinegar washes, charcoal dust applied directly, and even mercury treatments, all tinged with desperation and the desire for relief. The afternoon wanes, and you return to your dwelling, weary from the constant battles of survival and hygiene. The space is small, damp, and cluttered, but it is yours, a haven from the relentless outside world. You prepare your meager meal, often a simple stew or thick bread slathered with dripping or cheese. You eat slowly, mindful of the condition of your teeth and the risks hidden in every bite. The ache in your jaw pulses, reminding you of the fragility of your existence. The evening brings little relief as you tend to your clothing, preparing for another laundry day. The ritual of soaking, scrubbing, and wringing out fabrics that have borne the weight of a week or more of dirt, sweat, and soot. The water is heated painstakingly over a fire and mixed with lye soap, a harsh substance that strips skin and fabric alike. The clothes hang damp and heavy in the cold air, promising a slow drying and a lingering mustiness. You prepare for bed, the scratchy blankets rough against your skin, a stark contrast to the dreams of cleanliness and comfort you allow yourself in rare moments of escape. Your body aches, your mouth throbs, and the city sleeps around you, filled with the hum of distant factories and the occasional cough or groan, the struggle to maintain dignity, hygiene, and health. In a world built on soot and sweat is relentless and unyielding, yet beneath the grime and pain there is an unspoken camaraderie, a shared endurance that binds you to those around you. You close your eyes, pondering the paradox of Victorian hygiene, the rituals designed to uphold appearances that often exacerbate suffering, the social hierarchies enforced through cleanliness, and the quiet heroism of those who face each day with weary grace. The night wraps you in its cold embrace, but also offers a moment of peace, a brief reprieve before the cycle begins. Anew, the story of Victorian dental hygiene and daily survival continues unfolding, a testament to human resilience and the persistent hope for a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. You awaken in the dim early light with the lingering ache in your jaw, a dull throb that reminds you dental misery is but one thread in the vast tapestry of Victorian hygiene. But today, your thoughts drift to an altogether more delicate and perilous Matter, the dance of childbirth and maternal care in a world that treats it as both a miracle and a menace. Your cramped room smells faintly of lavender and something antiseptic, or perhaps merely a hopeful pretense of cleanliness. The walls whisper stories of women who have come before you, their voices mingling with the creaks of wooden floorboards and the distant clatter of daily life beyond the thin walls. The day ahead promises not comfort but endurance, a trial by fire that demands every ounce of your stoicism and courage. You steel yourself, knowing that in this era childbirth is less a medical procedure and more a high-stakes gamble. With fate, the presence of a midwife or doctor is a blessing, but no guarantee. Theirs are hands, skilled in tradition and superstition, but often lacking in scientific knowledge. The air is thick with the scent of herbs, chamomile, and rue, meant to soothe and hasten labor, mingled with the faint but stubborn odor of unwashed bodies and damp linens. You wrap your fingers around the coarse sheets, the fabric rough against your skin, a constant reminder that luxury is a distant dream. The hours stretch long as contractions ebb and flow, bringing waves of pain that ripple through your body. Relentless and merciless, you focus on breathing, steadying your mind against the rising tide of discomfort. Each surge, a reminder that life hangs in the balance between joy and tragedy. The midwife offers quiet encouragement, her voice calm yet tinged with urgency. She administers poultices and teas, some soothing, others bitter. You wonder which will do more harm or good. The window casts weak light across the room, revealing the wariness etched into every face present, even the stoic husband, whose role is often silent and supportive, but always fraught with anxiety. You think of the countless women who have endured this right before you, some emerging victorious, others lost to fever, exhaustion, or heartbreak. The grim reality of puerperal fever lingers, a specter, hovering unseen and unstoppable. Despite the best efforts of caregivers, the Victorian obsession with propriety dictates silence around pain and suffering, an expectation that tears be hidden and strength displayed even in moments of despair. The social weight of producing a healthy heir presses heavily. The child, a symbol not just of life, but of status, security, and future hope. Your thoughts drift to the child you carry, the fragile miracle who might bring light to a world often dark and unforgiving. The moments between contractions are brief and precious, offering small sanctuaries of calm. Amidst chaos, you clutch a handkerchief damp with tears and sweat, the sounds of labor crescendo, the cries and gasps, a primal symphony echoing in the confined space. You brace yourself for the final push, the culmination of hours of anguish and versus determination. The midwife guides and encourages you. The world narrows to the ache and the breath and the will to bring forth life. The child arrives with a weak but piercing cry, a fragile testament to survival. You marvel at the tiny form, the softness of skin, the miracle of breath and heartbeat. Amidst the grit and grime of the era, the room fills with tentative relief and exhaustion. The newborn wrapped in coarse blankets, a symbol of hope and continuity. Yet the ordeal is far from over. The postpartum period, fraught with danger and hardship, your body weak and vulnerable, demands care and rest in a world where such luxuries are often scarce. Support is uneven and the threat of infection looms large. Every moment requires vigilance, the endless cycles of feeding, soothing, and cleaning test your limits While your own recovery progresses slowly, the social expectations for mothers are exacting, demanding selflessness, endurance, and unwavering commitment, the narrative of Victorian childbirth. Hygiene and maternal care is a complex tapestry woven with threads of courage, fear, ignorance, and hope. It reveals a society caught between progress and tradition, where miracles are shadowed by tragedy and the quiet strength of women sustains families, communities, and an era teetering on the cusp of modernity. The paradoxes abound. Advances in medical knowledge are tempered by persistent superstition, expanding roles for women constrained by rigid social norms, and the desperate yearning for cleanliness and health hindered by urban squalor. As night falls, you find a fleeting moment of peace amidst the chaos, a brief pause to honor endurance, to steel yourself for challenges ahead. The story continues unfolding in the gritty, relentless, unwashed reality of Victorian existence, a testament to human resilience and stubborn hope for a better tomorrow. You awaken once more in the muted, gray dawn, the weight of yesterday's ordeal still pressing heavily on your body. Your jaw no longer the center of your suffering, but a distant memory replaced by the raw exhaustion that accompanies new motherhood. In Victorian England, where every breath is tinged with soot and sorrow, and hope is as fragile as the linen swaddling your newborn, the morning air is heavy with the scent of damp stone and coal smoke, a familiar companion that clings stubbornly to your skin and clothes. Your cramped room offers little comfort, the walls thin and stained, revealing the passage of countless lives lived in similar struggle. You rise carefully aware of the delicate balance between pain and progress, your movements deliberate, mindful of the healing wounds and the constant demands of your infant who lies nestled beside you, a tiny bundle of vulnerability and wonder. The days ahead promise relentless cycles of feeding, soothing, and watching your child with a vigilance born of necessity and love. Yet the challenges extend far beyond the nursery. The city outside thrums with the noisy bustle of life. Industrial chimneys belch smoke into the sky, a dark veil that settles over streets teeming with humanity and hardship. The smell of sweat, smoke, and unwashed bodies mixes with the ever-present stench of horse manure and open sewers, a constant reminder of the precariousness of health in this crowded urban jungle. Your thoughts wander to the ever-present threat of disease, the invisible enemy lurking in every corner. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid, and worse, stalking the poor with ruthless efficiency. The lack of clean water, proper sanitation, and medical knowledge ensures that survival is often a matter of chance rather than will or virtue. You reflect on the social dynamics that govern daily life, the rigid class structures that dictate access to resources and care. The wealthy, cloistered in sanitized enclaves, while the poor endure filth and neglect. Blamed for their own suffering, the cruelty of these unspoken judgments fuels a simmering resentment and a grim determination to persevere. You think of the bustling markets and crowded tenements where children play amid filth and danger there. Laughter, a fragile defiance against the harshness of their world. The cacophony of voices, street cries, and coughing fits creates a symphony of survival, a backdrop to your own struggles and triumphs. Hygiene remains a daily battle you fight with. Whatever tools you can muster, the scarcest soap, rough towels, and shared bathhouses where privacy is a luxury few can afford, the rituals of washing, scrubbing, and airing Outclothes are exhausting chores undertaken with a mix of necessity and hope to stave off the pests that prey on the weak lice fleas, and bedbugs infest every corner, a constant war that saps strength and spirits. You recall the advertisements for miracle cures and potions that promise relief from decay, disease, and despair. But you know better. They are mostly scams, preying on fear and desperation, offering false hope and sometimes real harm. You ponder the slow march of scientific progress, the occasional breakthrough in antiseptics, anesthesia, and public health measures that flicker like distant stars in the otherwise murky night of Victorian medicine. The tension between old beliefs and new knowledge plays out daily in homes, hospitals, and back alleys, a battleground of ideas and practices that shape lives and deaths. You consider the personal toll, the weariness etched into faces, the calloused hands of laborers, the stoic resilience of mothers, and the silent grief of those who have lost too much. The human spirit endures, stubbornly refusing to be extinguished. Despite the grime, the pain, and the relentless grind of existence, your mind drifts to moments of unexpected joy, a shared meal, a child's laughter, a rare day of sunshine breaking through the soot and smog, small victories that sustain you amid the hardship. The day unfolds with the rhythm of routine and unpredictability, each moment a thread in the intricate fabric of Victorian life. You prepare for the evening, tending to your child, nursing the wounds of your own body and soul, finding solace in the quiet companionship of loved ones or fleeting moments of solitude. The city outside settles into a weary hush, the distant clang of factory whistles fading into the night. A lullaby for a world both beautiful and brutal, the story of Victorian hygiene, health, and human endurance continues to weave its complex tale, a testament to the indomitable will to live and the fragile hope for a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. You rise from the restless sleep that seems to have become your closest companion in this grim era. The ache in your body softened but not vanished, replaced now by the familiar heavy fog of exhaustion that clings stubbornly as you face another day in the relentless fog of Victorian London, where dirt and despair mingle freely with fleeting moments of human kindness. The morning air greets you cold and damp, a gray pall that seeps through the thin walls of your cramped dwelling, mingling with the ever-present scent of coal, smoke, sweat, and the faint sharp tints of something burning somewhere. Unseen, you dress slowly in layers of heavy wool that scratch and weigh. You down each garment, a small victory against the chill, but also a trap for the grime and pests that plague the city. Your thoughts drift to the endless cycle of chores and battles that await the simple act of cleanliness. Now a daily siege against the relentless tide of dirt and diseases. The public washhouses are your battleground, the cramped, crowded places where privacy is a fantasy and cleanliness a fleeting hope. The water, tepid at best, often mixed with the residue of countless others who have come before you. You scrub with a rough brush and a bit of lye soap that burns your skin and stiffens your hands. Yet you persist, knowing the alternative is the slow creep of illness and social scorn. The laundry is another ordeal, the soaking, wringing, and scrubbing of heavy soiled garments in pots of boiling water. The smell of sweat starch and burnt fabric fills the air as you hang damp clothes on lines that sag under the weight, the cold biting at your fingers as you battle elements to dry what little you have, while around you the city hums with the ceaseless noise of industry, the clang of metal, the whistle of trains, and the murmur of thousands of lives. Intertwined in struggle and survival, the streets teem with people wrapped in grime and desperation, their faces etched with fatigue and resolve. The children play in gutters and alleys, oblivious or perhaps resigned to the hazards that surround them. The smell of horse manure mingles with rotting refuse, and the unmistakable stench of unwashed humanity, a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and death. In these crowded quarters you navigate elements to dry what little you have, while around you the city hums with the ceaseless noise of industry. The clang of metal, the whistle of trains, and the murmur of thousands of lives intertwined in struggle and survival. The streets teem with people wrapped in grime and desperation, their faces etched with fatigue and resolve. The children play in gutters and alleys, oblivious or perhaps resigned to the hazards that surround them. The smell of horse manure mingles with rotting refuse and the unmistakable stench of unwashed humanity, a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and death. In these crowded quarters, you navigate the labyrinth of narrow streets where the gas lamps sputter and flicker, casting long shadows on walls stained by years of soot and neglect. The shops display wares that range from fresh to questionably edible, and the vendors call out with practiced urgency, their voices a soundtrack to your daily trek. You think of the meals ahead, often simple and monotonous, the thick stews and breads, thick with grit, a far cry from the sumptuous feasts promised in glossy advertisements. Your teeth ache with the memory of past neglect, a dull throb that reminds you of the ongoing battle beneath your gums, yet you push forward, swallowing the discomfort to nourish your body for the trials ahead. The social fabric is woven with threads of suspicion and gossip, the hierarchies of class and cleanliness dictating who is trusted, who is shunned. The wealthy flaunt their imported linens and scented soaps, while the poor cling to rationed scraps and makeshift remedies. The disparity, sharp and unyielding, fostering resentment and quiet rebellion. You recall the rumors and whispered tales of miracle cures and poisonous potions sold by street vendors and quack doctors. The desperation of those willing to risk anything for a chance at relief or beauty, often ending in tragedy and heartbreak. The ever-evolving science of medicine offers glimmers of hope. Antiseptics and vaccines flicker on the horizon, but the shadows of superstition and ignorance are long and persistent. You remember the faces of doctors and nurses, some kind and dedicated, others brusque and overwhelmed, caught in a system, struggling to keep pace with a changing world. The emotional toll is immense. The daily grind wearing down spirits as well as bodies, the loss of friends, family, and neighbors to disease, accidents, and poverty, a constant shadow that tempers any joy you find in small victories, like a warm meal, a kind word, or a night free of pain. The resilience of the human spirit is remarkable, a stubborn flame flickering in the smog-filled gloom. You find moments of laughter and camaraderie in shared hardship, stories told in hushed voices over thin cups of tea, a dance of survival and hope despite the odds. The cycle of day into night repeats, the chores, the worries, the fleeting moments of peace. The city slowly settles into a fitful rest. The clatter of factories dies down, the gas lamps dim, leaving only the distant howl of wind and the occasional cough or groan from a nearby tenement. Your thoughts drift to tomorrow, the unknown battles ahead, the endless quest for dignity, health, and a future brighter than the soot-stained past. You close your eyes in the dark, crowded room, the weight of history and humanity pressing down, but also lifting you, carrying you forward into whatever dawn awaits. The story of Victorian hygiene, poverty, and resilience continues, weaving its complex web, a testament to the stubborn will to endure and the fragile hope for renewal. You awaken once again to the grim symphony of Victorian mornings, the faint gray light filtering through soot-stained windows, mingling with the relentless odor of coal, smoke, damp stone, and stale sweat. Your body aches with the accumulated weight of endless days, a dull, persistent reminder that survival in this unwashed world is both a blessing and a burden. Your jaw throbs faintly, a nagging echo of past dental battles, but today your mind wanders beyond the pain to the peculiar rituals and contradictions of Victorian hygiene, a world obsessed with appearances yet shackled by ignorance and grime. The streets outside pulse with life and misery, a tangled web of soot-stained faces, ragged children, and weary laborers, each carrying their own story of struggle and endurance. The air, thick with the pungent blend of sewage, refuse, and smoke, forms a persistent veil that no amount of washing can fully erase you. Dress in layers heavy and scratchy, each garment a fortress against the chill, but also a magnet for the dirt and pests that plague the city. Your routine begins with a ritual washing in a basin of lukewarm water laced with the harsh sting of lye soap, a substance as cruel to skin as it is necessary for some semblance of cleanliness. The process is arduous, your hands raw and stiff. As you scrub away the grime of yesterday, the water quickly becomes murky, a mixture of dirt, sweat, and the ever-persistent soot that settles everywhere. The communal washhouse looms as both sanctuary and nightmare, crowded and noisy, a place where privacy is a myth and cleanliness a fleeting hope. You wrestle with clothes thick with sweat and dirt, soaking them in boiling pots, scrubbing with brushes worn thin and hanging them in the bitter air to dry, a slow process often thwarted by the ever-present dampness that seeps through walls and windows. Your thoughts drift to the battle against pests, lice, fleas, and bedbugs, invisible enemies that infest bedding, clothing, and bodies. A relentless war fought with homemade remedies, powders, and fumigations that offer only temporary respite. The market beckons with its chaotic mix of sights, sounds, and smells, a carnival of survival vendors shout, hawking produce, often bruised, wilted, or dust-coated, meats salted and preserved beyond recognition, and breads dense and stale. You navigate the crowded alleys, mindful of spilled refuse puddles that shimmer with oily rainbows, and the occasional human excrement, a vivid reminder of the absent sanitation. The din of voices blends with coughing fits, and the clatter of carts, horses, and children playing amid the squalor. You encounter neighbors, exchanging wary glances, polite smiles, and whispered rumors, the social fabric woven with threads of suspicion, judgment, and fragile solidarity. Your stomach churns with the memory of meals past, thick soups watered down with dubious ingredients, meats preserved with questionable salts, and stale bread, a diet that dulls the senses and weakens the body but sustains life. Your aching teeth remind you of the daily struggle for oral hygiene, the use of charcoal powders, crushed bones, and minty tinctures, a poor defense against decay and pain extractions, frequent and brutal, a grim Testament to the limits of Victorian dentistry, the disparity between rich and poor glaring in every detail. The wealthy flaunting imported soaps, perfumed waters, and private baths, while the poor contend with shared facilities and rationed resources. The obsession with cleanliness, often a mask for deeper social prejudices, blaming the victim and ignoring systemic failures. Your mind drifts to the medical advances flickering on the horizon. Antiseptics, anesthesia, and vaccines promising a future where suffering might be lessened, but the present remains harsh and unyielding. The emotional toll is immense. Grief, loss, and exhaustion etched into every face you pass. The resilience of those who endure staggering, a testament to human spirit. Moments of kindness, a shared loaf of bread, a warm word, a child's laughter, offering fragile hope in the relentless grind. The city settles into a weary hush, the distant factory whistles fading, the gas lamps flickering out, leaving darkness, and the occasional cough or groan a lullaby for a world both beautiful and brutal. You close your eyes, pondering the paradox of Victorian hygiene and health, a dance between hope and despair, filth and dignity, science and superstition, a story of survival and stubborn hope for a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. The tale continues unfolding in the soot-stained shadows and narrow alleys, a testament to endurance and the fragile promise of renewal. You awaken to the cold, gray light filtering weakly through the grime-streaked windowpane, the city outside a restless tangle of smoke, soot, and weary souls. Your jaw throbs faintly, a dull reminder of the ongoing war between decay and survival. But your thoughts drift beyond the aches to the myriad ways Victorian hygiene manifests in the daily rituals and harsh realities that define your existence. You rise slowly, mindful of the stiff joints and rough skin that tell the story of nights spent in damp beds, layered thick with dust and the occasional unwelcome visitor. You dress in garments stiffened by sweat and soot, each piece a fortress against the biting chill, but also a trap for grime and pests. The air in your cramped room, thick with the scent of damp wool, lye soap, and faint traces of herbal tinctures. You carry out the morning ablutions, a meager ritual of washing with basins of cold or tepid water, sometimes laced with vinegar or bitter herbs, meant to cleanse, but more often leaving skin dry, cracked, and irritated. The communal wash house beckons, a place of paradox, crowded, cramped, and often unsanitary, yet a sanctuary for fleeting moments of cleanliness. The steam rises, mingling with the noise of voices, clanging buckets, and the occasional splash as you scrub. The layers of grime and soot that cling stubbornly to your skin and clothes, your hands raw from the harsh lye soap, the smell of sweat, starch, and burnt fabric thick in the air. The clothesline outside, heavy with damp garments, swaying gently in the cold breeze, each piece a testament to the ongoing battle against the relentless assault of dirt and decay your journey takes you through bustling streets where the clamor of vendors hawking produce, often bruised and wilted, mingles with the cacophony of horses, carts, and shouting children. The pungent odors of refuse, rotting food, and human waste form a constant undercurrent. The market, a chaotic swirl of desperation, hope, and survival. You navigate carefully, avoiding puddles shimmering with oil, and worse, the social dynamics of cleanliness play out in every glance, every whispered judgment. The wealthy flaunting their perfumes, soaps, and private baths, while the poor make do with rationed scraps and makeshift remedies. The disparity, glaring and unyielding, fostering resentment and quiet defiance. You recall the tales of miracle cures and potions sold by street hawkers, promising relief from aches, decay, and despair. But most are scams, preying on fear and desperation, offering false hope and sometimes real harm. The slow march of medical progress flickers. Like a distant star, antiseptics, anesthesia, and vaccines, promising a future less cruel, but the present remains harsh and unyielding. Superstition and ignorance cast long shadows, the emotional toll, immense faces etched with grief, loss, and exhaustion, a testament to human resilience. Small moments of laughter, shared meals, and fleeting kindnesses, offering fragile hope amid the relentless grind. The day fades into night, the city settling into a weary hush, gas lamps flickering out and factory whistles silencing the world. To a fitful rest, your thoughts drift to tomorrow, the unknown battles for dignity, health, and survival. The story of Victorian hygiene poverty, an endurance unfolding in soot-stained alleys, narrow rooms, and crowded washhouses, a testament to the stubborn will to endure and the fragile promise of renewal. The morning dawns pale and reluctant, casting a faint cold light over the soot-stained rooftops of the city. The air thick with the lingering odor of coal smoke, horse manure, and the unmistakable scent of damp fabric left out too long. You rise with the slow stiffness of a body accustomed to hardship, muscles tight from nights spent on scratchy beds, and skin marked by the endless, pursued struggle against grime and discomfort. The ache in your jaw, now a familiar companion, a dull echo from battles fought and lost in the shadowy recesses of Victorian dentistry, a world where toothaches were met with crude extractions, performed without anesthesia, and dental hygiene was a patchwork of charcoal powders, crushed bones, and dubious herbal concoctions. Your thoughts turn to the daily rituals that both sustain and torment you. The morning ablutions, a brief interlude of fleeting cleanliness in a world where dirt clings with stubborn tenacity. You gather your basin and soap, a harsh, lye-infused bar that burns the skin but promises some reprieve from the cold dust and sweat that cling like a second skin. You work methodically, scrubbing your hands, arms, face, and neck, the water quickly darkening with the residue of dirt and soot, a grim reminder of the unrelenting assault of urban life. The communal washhouse beckons with its promise of hot water and a chance to wash away the grime, but also with the reality of cramped quarters, shared with strangers, all fighting the same losing battle against filth and pests. The air inside is thick with steam, the mingled scents of soap, sweat, and unwashed bodies. A cacophony of voices echoing off the cold stone walls. You scrub your clothes with vigor, the fabric stiff and worn, your hands raw and aching from the rough washboard and harsh soaps. The damp clothes hang heavy on the line outside, the chill air slowing the drying process. You move through the streets, the city alive with the sounds of vendors hawking bruised fruit and salted meets, the rattle of carts, the chatter of children, and the distant clang of factory whistles, the scent of rotting refuse mingling with horse manure and the ever-present coal smoke, a potent reminder of the fragile boundary between survival and sickness. The market, a chaotic swirl of humanity, each face etched with fatigue and determination. You navigate carefully, avoiding puddles that shimmer with oily rainbows, or worse, the threat of disease. Lurking, unseen, in every corner, your thoughts. Drift to the food. You will eat the thick stews and dense breads that form the staple of your diet, often heavy with grit and salt, masking the true state of the ingredients. Your teeth ache at the memory of past neglect, a constant reminder of the ongoing battle for dental survival, the disparity between rich and poor glaring in every detail, the wealthy flaunting imported soaps, perfumed waters, and private baths, while the poor make do with rationed scraps and makeshift remedies. The obsession with cleanliness, often a mask for deeper social prejudices, blaming victims while ignoring systemic failures. You consider the slow progress of medical knowledge, antiseptics, vaccines, and anesthesia, flickering on the horizon, promising a future less cruel, but for now, the shadows of ignorance, superstition, and neglect loom large, the emotional toll immense, the daily grind wearing down spirits and bodies, alike the loss of friends, neighbors, and loved ones to disease, accidents, and poverty, a constant specter tempering any joy you find in small victories, moments of laughter, shared meals, and fleeting kindness, offering fragile hope in the relentless grind. The city slowly settles into a weary hush, the distant factory whistles, fading the gas lamps, flickering out, leaving darkness punctuated only by the occasional cough or groan, a lullaby for a world both beautiful and brutal. You close your eyes, pondering the paradox of Victorian hygiene and health, a dance between hope and despair, filth and dignity, science and superstition, a story of survival and stubborn hope for a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. The tale continues unfolding in soot-stained alleys, narrow rooms, and crowded washhouses, a testament to endurance and the fragile promise of renewal. You awaken once again to the muted gray dawn, the city outside, a labyrinth of soot-stained rooftops and winding alleys where the persistent scent of coal smoke and damp stone lingers stubbornly in the chill air. Your body aches with the familiar, dull throb of countless hardships endured, the ache in your jaw now a distant echo, replaced by the steady fatigue that settles deep in your bones as you rise from your scratchy bed, wrapped in layers of coarse wool and threadbare linens, each garment heavy with the residue of days spent battling grime and discomfort. You begin your morning ritual, a cautious dance of washing, scrubbing, and dressing, with water often lukewarm and soap harsh, enough to sting the skin, a bitter necessity in a world where cleanliness is both a challenge and a social imperative. The communal washhouse awaits, a cramped space thick with steam and the mingled scents of sweat, soap, and unwashed bodies, a battleground where privacy is sacrificed and fleeting moments of cleanliness fiercely contested. You scrub at your skin and clothes, the lye soap biting your hands, the water quickly darkening with soot and dirt, a grim testament to the ceaseless assault of urban life. The streets beckon with their chaotic symphony of sounds and smells, vendors hawk bruised fruit, salted meats, and dense breads, while the clatter of carts, the chatter of children, and the distant clang of factory whistles fill the air. The pungent odors of rotting refuse, horse manure, and coal smoke form a constant backdrop, a reminder of the fragile boundary between survival and sickness. You navigate the crowded alleys, carefully avoiding puddles shimmering with oily rainbows, or worse, aware of the invisible threats lurking unseen. Your thoughts turn to the meals, Ahead, often simple and monotonous, thick stews, watered down with dubious ingredients and stale bread, a diet that dulls the senses and weakens the body. Your aching teeth remind you daily of the battle for dental survival. The crude charcoal powders and herbal tinctures offering little defense against decay and pain. Extractions, brutal and frequent, a grim testament to the limits of Victorian dentistry. The social chasm between rich and poor, glaring in every detail. The wealthy flaunting imported soaps, perfumed waters, and private baths, while the poor contend with rationed scraps and makeshift remedies. The obsession with cleanliness, often a facade masking deeper social prejudices. Blaming victims and ignoring systemic failures. The slow march of medical progress flickering on the horizon. Antiseptics, vaccines, and anesthesia, promising a future less cruel, but the present remains harsh and unyielding. Superstition and ignorance casting long shadows. The emotional toll, immense grief, loss, and exhaustion etched into every face, a testament to human resilience. Small moments of laughter, shared meals, and fleeting kindnesses offering fragile hope amid the relentless grind. As the day fades into night, the city settles into a weary hush. The gas lamps flickering out and factory whistles silencing the world to a fitful rest. Your thoughts drift to tomorrow, the unknown battles for dignity, health, and survival. The story of Victorian hygiene, poverty, and endurance, unfolding in soot-stained alleys, narrow rooms, and crowded washhouses. A testament to the stubborn will to endure and the fragile promise of renewal. You awake with the reluctant light of dawn barely piercing the soot-stained window panes of your cramped quarters, the familiar chill creeping through threadbare curtains wrapping the room in a damp embrace, your body heavy with exhaustion and the ever-present ache in your jaw, a dull reminder of yesterday's battle with decay. But today, your mind wanders to the ceaseless demands of Victorian daily life, a world where hygiene is a constant war, fought with scarce resources and stubborn determination. Your morning begins with the ritual of washing, a cautious endeavor, involving lukewarm water, often shared, and a harsh lye soap that stings the skin, stripping away grime and moisture alike, your fingers raw and cracked as you scrub the dirt ingrained by the relentless coal smoke and sweat. The basin quickly fills with murky water, a testament to the unyielding assault of urban life. You dress in layers of wool and linen, coarse and heavy, trapping both warmth and filth in equal measure. Your clothes, stiff and scratchy, a daily reminder that comfort is a luxury few can afford. Stepping outside, the city greets you with its familiar assault, the air thick with the mingled scents of rotting refuse, horse manure, and unwashed bodies, a pungent reminder of the fragile balance between survival and sickness. The streets teem with a cacophony of voices, carts, wheels, and children playing amidst the filth. Vendors hawk bruised fruit, salted meats, and stale bread, their calls cutting through the haze, a backdrop to the ceaseless grind of life. Your path weaves through crowded alleys, puddles shimmer with oily rainbows, and worse, each step a negotiation with the invisible threats lurking in the shadows. The social dynamics of cleanliness and class play out in every glance, every whispered judgment. The wealthy flaunt their imported soaps, perfumed waters, and private baths, while the poor make do with rationed scraps and home remedies. A glaring disparity that fuels resentment and quiet defiance. You recall the promises of miracle cures and potions sold by street hawkers. Most scams preying on fear, desperation, and vanity, offering false hope and sometimes real harm. Medical progress flickers on the horizon. Antiseptics, anesthesia, and vaccines. A distant promise for a future. Less cruel, but the present remains steeped in ignorance and superstition. The emotional toll is immense. Grief, loss, and exhaustion etched into every face you pass, a testament to human resilience. Moments of laughter. Shared meals and fleeting kindness, offering fragile hope amid the relentless grind. The day wanes, and the city settles into a weary tush. Gas lamps flicker, and factory whistles fade the world, slipping into a fitful rest. Your thoughts drift to tomorrow. The unknown battles ahead for dignity, health, and survival. The story of Victorian hygiene, poverty, and endurance continues weaving its complex web, a testament to the stubborn will to endure and the fragile promise of renewal. You awaken to the pale, reluctant light of dawn filtering through grimy windows. The air heavy with the familiar odors of coal, smoke-damp stone, and stale humanity. Your body aches with the cumulative weight of countless nights spent on scratchy beds wrapped in coarse wool and thin linen garments that trap both heat and grime. The ache in your jaw, now just a dull echo, a ghost of past battles fought in the shadowy recesses of Victorian dentistry. Today your thoughts wander beyond the physical to the invisible war waged daily against the filth and decay that define your existence in a city where hygiene is a battlefield and cleanliness a fleeting victory. Your morning ritual begins with a basin of lukewarm water and a harsh bar of lye. Soap, a cruel elixir that strips your skin of natural oils, leaving it raw and cracked, yet necessary against the relentless assault of soot and sweat. You scrub your hands, arms, and face with methodical determination, the water quickly turning murky, a swirling testament to the grime you fight to shed. Your clothes, stiff with dirt and sweat, cling to your body as you dress, layering wool and linen to fend off the biting cold and the ever-present pests that infest bedding and garments. The communal washhouse looms ahead, a cavernous space, thick with steam voices and the scent of unwashed bodies, a paradoxical sanctuary where fleeting cleanliness is bought with cramped quarters and scant privacy. You join the chorus of scrubbing hands, the clang of buckets, and murmured complaints as you wrestle with the heavy fabric of your clothes, soaking, scrubbing, and hanging them to dry in the bitter air outside. The city breathes a cacophony of sounds, the rattle of carts, vendors hawking bruised fruit, salted meats, and stale bread, the laughter and cries of children playing amid refuse, the clatter of factory whistles, and the omnipresent hum of industry. A symphony of survival amidst squalor. The streets, slick with mud and waste puddles, shimmer with oily rainbows and, worse, invisible enemies lurking in the shadows. You navigate carefully, aware that disease stalks every corner. Your thoughts turn to food, the meager sustenance of thick stews, dense breads, and watered-down tea. A diet that numbs the senses and drains strength. Your aching teeth remind you daily of the limits of Victorian dentistry, the crude powders and herbal tinctures, a poor defense against decay and pain extractions. Brutal and frequent, a grim testament to human endurance. The chasm between rich and poor, evident in every detail, The wealthy, flaunting imported soaps, perfumed waters, and private baths, while the poor survive on rationed scraps and makeshift remedies. The obsession with cleanliness, a mask for social prejudice, blaming victims, while ignoring systemic failures. The slow march of medical progress, a distant flicker. Antiseptics, vaccines, and anesthesia, promising hope, yet superstition, ignorance, and neglect cast long shadows. The emotional toll, immense grief, loss, and exhaustion, etched into every face, a testament to resilience. Small moments of laughter, shared meals, and fleeting kindness, offering fragile hope amid the relentless grind. As dusk falls, the city settles into a weary hush. Gas lamps flicker, and factory whistles fade into silence. The world slipping into a fitful rest. You close your eyes, pondering the paradox of Victorian hygiene. A dance of hope and despair, filth and dignity, science and superstition. The story continues, unfolding in soot-stained alleys, narrow rooms, and crowded washhouses, a testament to endurance and the fragile promise of renewal.